I'm pretty sure many of you are fans of the NES and Super Nintendo because not only are they great consoles, but they also have two of the best controllers ever designed in the video game industry. Now, one of the things that's kind of unfortunate is nowadays a lot of people have larger TVs and they sit farther away from them and a whole bunch of stuff. Well, look, it sucks, the controller cables are kind of short, but 8BitDo has figured out a solution. These are the 8BitDo retro receivers, and essentially they take what is an NES and a Super Nintendo port and turn them into Bluetooth devices. Both of these retro receivers will work with the original NES and the original Super Nintendo, but you'll also be able to use a lot of other clone systems. Unfortunately, not every Bluetooth controller you have in your collection is going to work with these receivers, but what will work are actually pretty useful controllers all the same. You'll be able to use PlayStation 3 controllers, PlayStation 4 controllers, Wiimotes, or the Wii U Pro controller, which is one of my personal favorites, and you'll be able to use every single 8BitDo controller they've ever released, which is really cool because those controllers are actually solid devices, like the ones we're showing off right here. Both the 8BitDo NES 30 gamepad and the 8BitDo SNES 30 gamepad are two really high quality controllers that feel just like the original Nintendo controllers they were based off of, unless you don't take into consideration that the NES 30 has a whole heck of a lot more buttons and shoulder buttons as well. In fact, you can use the NES 30 gamepad to play SNES games, which is weird, but you can do it if you want. And when it comes to playing NES games and having a controller that has more buttons than you need, those extra buttons act as basically turbo buttons, which is a welcome input, especially if you like playing shoot 'em ups and you don't want to push the button a billion times. Utilizing the USB ports on these retro receivers, you can additionally use them as Bluetooth receivers for a computer if you want. But there are other cheaper options to use for Bluetooth connectivity on a PC, so probably that wouldn't be the reason why you'd get these things. Now, as far as connecting random Bluetooth controllers to these devices, here's where we get into a little bit of an issue. Now, right off the bat, 8BitDo controllers are really easy to connect to these things. You just hold down the start button on the controllers and they just connect really fast, and it's kind of effortless. But when it comes to other controllers that aren't the PlayStation 4, which is also very easy to connect, you have to start doing things a little bit different. The PlayStation 3 controller requires you to plug it up to your PC first and change some settings around on the controller itself just so it's able to connect to these receivers. I didn't find that method very fun or exciting, and really I just stuck with the PlayStation 4 controller that I had instead. The Wii Remote and Wii U Pro controller connect the same way as the PlayStation 4 controller, which is essentially just turning on the sync and connecting it. It's pretty fast and hard to screw up, but once in a while I found that all of the controllers just didn't always connect properly. Sometimes the sync would just get lost in this loop of not being able to connect, and really there's no way around it other than cycling the power of the controllers and the retro receivers themselves. But once I cycled the power, they generally worked. It's just a weird thing that happened once in a while. But once you have the controllers working, you're in for a pretty good time when it comes to playing video games, because the wireless response on these controllers are incredibly fast. I compared all of my original wired Nintendo controllers to the wireless controllers from 8BitDo, and folks, I was pretty shocked. It's so quick in response time that if I didn't know any better, I would have said that these things were actually hooked up with a wire. My only criticism with this whole setup is that you can't really customize the button layout of any of the controllers you use, which is really unfortunate. Most of the controllers you're going to be utilizing wirelessly are going to have button layouts that are very similar to what an NES or Super Nintendo would actually use. But the folks over at Retrobit and 8BitDo also sent us a Nintendo 64 Bluetooth gamepad. Now, while you can't use this with a real Nintendo 64, you can use it on cell phone games or even on your PC, and it works really well like that. But if you want to use it on an NES or Super Nintendo utilizing these Bluetooth connectors, well, you're going to have a couple of issues. With the NES, you kind of have a similar looking layout, at least with B, A, Start, and the directional pad, but the select button's going to be somewhere else on the controller. And when you go to play Super Nintendo games, the button layout is a lot weirder. Just look at my hands while I'm playing Super Mario World. It's really insane, and it doesn't feel that good. Without the ability to remap the buttons, it becomes a little bit more difficult than it needs to be when you're playing some of these games. So as long as you're okay with the controller you're using, it should be fine, but just make sure the button layout isn't crazy first. So as you can see, I'm a pretty big fan of these retro receivers, and although they don't connect to every controller effortlessly, the way it works so easily with the PlayStation 4 controller is worth its weight in gold. And look, at the end of the day, if you want Bluetooth connectivity with your NES or Super Nintendo, well, this is pretty much the best option in town.